Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Dr. Michael Shermer. Michael Shermer, please, for everyone out there listening who might not know who you are, introduce yourself to everybody.
Well, I am the publisher of this magazine, Skeptic magazine, which is a quarterly science publication of the Skeptics Society, which I direct. It's a 501c3 nonprofit science education organization. So our thing is promoting science, rationality, reason, empiricism, logic, and critical thinking of all kinds about any claims at all. And so from there, we have, a podcast, Michael Shermer Show. We have a Skeptic Substack column, and you can just go to skeptic.com to find information about all that. I'm also a professor at Chapman University, where I teach a course called Skepticism 101, How to Think Like a Scientist. So that's pretty much encapsulated the last 30 years of my life in 1 minute.
And if I had to ask you, what's one skeptic, I guess, that you kind of can, I would say debunk pretty easily? Like, what's one that you get all the time? I know it's either flat earth or something of those sorts. Like, those are the more popular ones.
Yes. Well, the flat earth thing just sprung up largely due to social media and a few viral videos that took off, and so that was popular. We did let's see if I have that issue here. It is. We actually did a cover story on the flat earth. That's actually what the flat earthers think that the earth looks like, this flat, round, pizza-like with a dome over it in which all the stars and planets and galaxies and so on are all embedded very close by. The sun and moon are just a few tens of miles apart, and just a few tens of miles up in the sky and so on. We deal with that if there's public interest in it. For example, if we get a lot of media queries about, who are these people and why are they saying that? Well, then we address it. But not just that, we did a pretty deep dive into who they are and why they believe, but also what's wrong with their arguments. I mean, it's one thing to say, well, these people are crazy because they believe the earth is flat, but they have arguments. So what are the counter arguments? Why do scientists think that the earth is round, and so on? So we went through all those as well. That hasn't been particularly huge. Much bigger, way bigger, and much more threatening are conspiracy theories surrounding the election. So the rigged election conspiracy theory as itself a sort of sub part of the QAnon conspiracy theory. These actually drive people to take actions that affect everybody. We live in a liberal democracy that depends on most people trusting the electoral system and process for being trustworthy, and they don't anymore because of this conspiracy theory that the election was rigged. And something like this week, we're recording this the February 18th, the latest poll this earlier this week was that something like 70% of self-professed Republicans believe that Joe Biden is an illegitimate president, that the election was stolen from Donald Trump, and some significant percentage of those 70% think violence is justified to return power to the rightful winner of the 2020 election, namely Donald Trump. So if he runs in 2024, which it looks like he will, and this conspiracy theory continues, we have a potential problem. So, from the ridiculous flat earthers to the threatening and dire, the rigged election conspiracy theory, what is actually true really matters, and that's what we do.
See, I knew you from the skeptic stuff, but then listening to a lot of the Michael Shermer show as well, too, and kind of understanding your angle with the social scientist. Do you understand, like, with the political stuff, like, is that a thing with the media? Is that just a mix up with how much, like, there's been so much back and forth? People don't know where to trust. I mean, a large amount of it too, people always say, oh, you got to get independent journalism. And then it's like anybody with a microphone. I'm not a journalist at all. I will be the first person to tell you, but people with podcasts reporting news or talking about news from something they've seen from one different source, or people reporting about Joe Rogan or something like that, which I mean, I can understand Joe Rogan just wanted to talk to people and then not realizing how big of an impact the show is. But it just seems like nobody really knows who to trust. Nobody knows where to go, I would say,
Hmm.
in a lot of angles. It seems like every news has a narrative. And then with a lot of like the vaccine talk as well, too, it's just been so flip-flop where people really don't know where to go. So it's like you have people that are heavy into the politics. And then even then, it seems like that's with everything. There's sides, there's biases. I mean, UFO community, half the time it's more about people talking trash on each other, which kind of eliminates the point of looking for extraterrestrial beings out
Hmm.
there. But especially
Hmm.
in what do you think this is? Do you think this is a ramp up from being locked down for so long, or do you think social media and all this has just given people a platform to be able to voice their opinion? And a lot of times it's very, very hard to, I guess, talk to something. There's no talking on social media most of the time.
Just screaming.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, no, the problem is not new because of the pandemic. Maybe that made it slightly worse, but certainly starting in 2015, 2016 or so, the my side bias and the polarization of politics became dramatically worse. But even that trend had been ongoing as tracked by political scientists since the mid 1990s. And the Clinton administration and the polarization around that with the rise of conservative talk radio, there was nothing Clinton could ever do that would not be treated other than something direly evil and immoral by the conservatives. And so that, and we know from polls that people who self-identify as independents has been decreasing, and the people who self-identify as either extreme right or extreme left, or they're shifting more and more from the center. So you just take that, just use a football analogy. Most politics is played between the 240-yard lines. Well, what's been happening is that people are moving further and further apart, say to the 30-yard lines or so, and feeling like not just that the other side is wrong, your pro-choice position is wrong and my pro-life position is right, but that you're immoral to hold that, you're evil to hold that position, you must be destroyed. Your career must be ruined for saying that you believe in this or that. And that's gotten worse, not only in the general public but also in the halls of Congress. Again, people that study congressional behavior and voting records and so on tell us that senators and congressmen used to hang out with each other on the weekends, pre say 2000, even though they're on opposite sides of the aisle politically. They were friends, they could talk to each other, and they may disagree about what's the right tax rate or what's the proper immigration policy or whatever, but they liked each other and respected each other. That is no longer the case. It appears that most congressmen and representatives go back to their homes most of the time for fundraising, and also to not hang out with and not interact with people in the other party, because on conservative talk radio or television, that's considered traitorous. You're actually mingling with the enemy, and that makes you a traitor. So this is led to far more polarization. You can't just put it at the feet of Trump. It's been going on for a long time. He just ramped it up with his rhetoric, even in his own party. I mean, he just pilloried pretty mainstream Republicans like John McCain. I mean, John McCain, he's about as solid a conservative as you could find. And Trump derailed him. And Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Jeb Bush, these are all pretty mainstream conservatives. Well, if they're too centrist or liberal for Republicans now, what does that say about that party? Anyway, you're to the larger point. It's an ongoing problem, and of course, there's nothing new about sort of degrading your opponent in politics. That's been going on for centuries. And
Well,
so
is it gonna get better, or is it gonna get worse? Here's the thing, is like what I've been noticing a lot more, and I've talked about a couple of times, is that if you have someone with a platform, you'll have someone that has an opinion, or they think something. Like I've had guests on the show that think they have a certain point in their head that they want to, like, as soon as they bring it up, they're really, really strong in it. And I'm like, okay, like I don't have any like biases in anything. I'm not on a certain side or anything. I'm going to hear you out and have a conversation. the debates that get broadcast on national television are just entertainment. It's not anything real. There's no regular
Hmm.
discourse that occurs. And I think that's what happens is a lot of people start seeing what they see on TV and then kind of reenacting in a way. Not in a sense of like everyone's going to have their own debates, but that's what it's became to, is that if these people who are you are supporting are going to argue like that and bicker on television, then why can't we do it? And there's not really a difference, I would say. And I don't think you should be having that broadcast. I think there needs to be more of a rational discourse amongst people, better understanding whether I have a friend that's a flat earther. Now I'm gonna sit there and listen to him, and I have a 3 hour episode where I'm just astonished by all the information he's telling me. But I mean, I know that it's not flat, but at the same time, I'm gonna hear this person out and try and see their perspective. I think there needs to be a lot more of that as well too. My issue also with conspiracies is when they become violent. I don't think they necessarily should be becoming violent, but I mean, QAnon, a bunch of people looking for
Hmm.
pedophiles on, or
Hmm.
is it online, or is it's in person as well too? I
Well,
mean,
the Pizzagate was what launched the QAnon thing. That is that the belief that there's a secret satanic pedophile ring running out of this Comet Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria in Washington D.C. That's what started it. And so this brings up an interesting problem of belief. When people say, "Yeah, I believe that," did they really believe that? I mean, do you really believe there's a criminal ring going on at this pizzeria right down the street? Shouldn't you do something about that? I mean, why doesn't somebody call the police and let's go over there and break up this criminal ring? Instead, they don't, except for one guy did, Edgar Welch. He went there with a gun and to break up the ring. And he was quite surprised to find out there's no basement at the Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria where the pedophile ring was supposedly going on. He shot a few bullets into the ceiling. He was arrested, and he was convicted and went to jail for a couple of years, and now feels embarrassed, as he should. But most people don't believe it like that. They believe it more like that's the kind of thing Democrats would do, or I hate those. I hate that Hillary, and the ring was supposed to be led by Hillary Clinton and other Democrats. So it's kind of a what I call a proxy belief. That is, it's a stand-in for something else. Even if that particular conspiracy theory is not true, the larger conspiracy theory that Democrats can't be trusted and they're up to no good. That's what they believe when they say they believe QAnon.
what do you think about, like, because I've always talked about an Illuminati. Now, I'm not talking about people with cloaks in the woods or anything like that, sacrificing whatever to a statue of Moloch the owl god. I'm more talking about the lines of that, like, especially during this pandemic, there's talk way before the pandemic about being your own self entrepreneur and going out and get that, or go and create your own business and, get that entrepreneurial dream. But sadly, when people did go do that, when they had the opportunity to during the pandemic, like a lot of people wanted to start up their own businesses, they failed. And a part of the reason why they failed is they realized it's a corporate owned world. So it's disguised as like go out and
Mhm.
get your own kind of self, business and be your own creator in a sense. But then they realized it's hard and they feel like they're the failure when really it's just dominantly owned. I mean, there's giant businesses. That's the Illuminati to me, is just a bunch of people who have a lot of money who figured out how to make the system work in their favor. I mean, cut corners,
Mhm.
do whatever they possibly can. I don't think it goes into the magic stuff, and maybe there's probably some weird person out there who practices it in his free time, but that's the in a truth in a lot of aspects from what we've seen. I mean, nobody would have ever thought about an Epstein happening, and then that came out. So then people are just like their minds are melted. They think everything's a conspiracy, and that's where it starts
Mhm.
to go down like a bad rabbit hole. I mean, in a sense, if you said like, why do you believe the earth is flat? And someone goes, well, because NASA, the first pictures they ever released, they photoshopped clouds or they added clouds to it to make it look more appealing to the public. Okay, I can be with that. And then they start talking about Hitler and like you fall off the edge of the earth, and you're like, that's where we draw the line, man. You lost me there.
Yeah, so I call this constructive conspiracies. My next big book comes out in the fall called Conspiracy. And I have a kind of a three-part model, theoretical model for why people believe conspiracy theories, one of which is what you just said, that what I call constructive conspiracism. That is, there's enough conspiracy theories that turn out to be true that it pays to err on the side of assuming more of them are true than actually are. That is, you make more type 1 errors. And so your example of, NASA lied about airbrushing in some clouds. Yeah, I do remember that story. So, okay, they lied. Now, if they lied about that, maybe they'll lie about something else. Or the Roswell incident, that, oh, it's a weather balloon. Well, then in the 90s, they admitted the government, Pentagon, that, no, these were actually high altitude surveillance balloons listening for acoustic signatures of Soviet nuclear tests in the upper atmosphere. Oh, okay. Why didn't you tell us that back in the 40s? Because it was the Cold War. That's why. And, so governments do lie to their citizens. They do keep secrets. They do cover things up. Absolutely. This, the Pentagon Papers, the Afghanistan papers, WikiLeaks, this is exposed just thousands of examples, warrantless wiretapping, as it's technically called, but, surveilling the American public, their phone records, and not just the records of who they called, but, actual phone conversations, apparently. And, this has been going on. So you can't really blame people for thinking, I think there might be something to this conspiracy theory right here, because all these others turned out to be true. Right. So there's a kind of a logic to the psychology of assuming more conspiracy theories are true than actually are, because of that past history. And so, when you hear someone like Alex Jones ranting on about Sandy Hook as a false flag operation, okay, that's nonsense. But, in the Kennedy administration, his own staff brought to him this idea of setting up a false flag operation to have an excuse to invade Cuba, to assassinate Castro, and so on. Now, to his credit, he rejected these ideas, but some of them included, dressing up a American jet as a Russian MiG or as a Cuban aircraft, and then shooting it down after buzzing the Miami airport, and blaming that on the Russians, right? Or all kinds of ways to assassinate Castro, and so on. Now, to his credit, Kennedy said, "We're not going to do that," but that our top military leaders were even thinking that this was a good idea, shows you how far the governments are willing to go. So when you hear about Putin thinking about a false flag operation as an excuse to invade Ukraine, that's not completely crazy. We know that the Nazis initiated the Reichstag fire soon after they came into power as an excuse to pass more draconian laws to control the media and so forth. So that's a false flag operation. The invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939, that was a false flag operation. The Nazis dressed up some Polish prisoners in Nazi uniforms and then killed them, and then blamed the Poles for killing their own soldiers. And then that was an excuse to invade Poland. There's a lot of that goes on historically. And so, and the assassination of political leaders, again, not uncommon historically. It's not a majority. If you look at the transfer of power from one monarch or king or leader of any kind from one to another, some significant two-digit percentage, not quite half, but maybe a third or so, the transfer of power happened violently. Assassinations, murder. So when you hear, JFK was assassinated by a cabal, no, I don't think so. I think it was a lone assassin. But you can't blame people for thinking, well, there could be something to it, because, this happens a lot in history.
See, this is my metaphor I always use is kind of that if they were to give you a hand of $1 million, but then a hand of shit as well too, you have to be willing to accept the shit for $1 million. Like I feel like if they were just open and honest about what they had, then a lot of people might be okay with some of the outcomes. But finding it out later makes it seem like there's more down the rabbit hole, and that's when they start to get lost in a sense. Which I mean, it leads into many things like trying to uncover secrets everywhere, and some of them do get a little bit crazy. But also, I think it makes people mistrusting of a lot of things, and then feel like they have to do a lot on their own as well too. And that leads into like one of your newest episodes, for instance, I know is probably getting a lot of heat just because, I mean, it was a fascinating episode, the archaeology episode with, I think her name was Elizabeth Weiss. I mean,
Yep.
You're listening to it. And then for me, I also know a side of me that's kind of like talking about, oh, in today's society, that's not going to agree because, genders and all that topic and discussion is kind of like it's kind of like walking over broken glass. It's like be very, very careful, especially in today's times. But I remember you mentioning the Conceptual Penis Project, which was a friend of yours who made that study. Now, that's true.
Yep.
I've learned first account from talking to academics on this show that a lot of these institutions, like there's a lot of people who, like with Avi Loeb, for instance, him saying that this comet came from, or this asteroid, whatever it's called from an extra terrestrial civilization. There are people that spent 30 years working on a project, and you're about to disable their theory with your idea, and that's going to cause
Hmm.
people to want to hold that and want to tear yours down, and then it becomes fighting. And that happens in science, academia. Some person's trying to publish something, another person comes in with a theory. They don't want to hear it because that's 30 years of their work that's about to go down the drain if that happens to be true. And that's not what I want in science. I want there to be an open discussion about it, but also have a base consensus of what the truth is. And I think everything that I've just said kind of falls in part with the same thing of having a discussion about these things as well too. Now, you don't want to entertain a lot of the dangerous conspiracies. You don't want that. But there's a way to kind of disarm it, and there's a way to bring the public to like a basic consensus when it comes to have conversation about a lot of this thing. And think, especially that's what I learned. There's people I don't agree with sometimes on the show that come on, but more than happy to hear their perspective and bring in the other sides. But it's a rational discourse instead of fighting, which I'd rather be promoting than what goes on today. I mean, I'm not crazy for saying that, but apparently the world will condemn you for it because a lot of people don't even want to let that in a little bit.
Hmm. Right. Well, since you brought up Avi Loeb, I'm on that Galileo project he launched at Harvard. He's the head of the astronomy department at Harvard, and he's a good guy. I had him on the show. It's really a signal detection problem. Does an object, an anomaly, it represent a natural phenomenon, like in this case, Oumuamua, entered our solar system and left clearly from another solar system? Well, what is it? Okay, is it a natural object or is it an extraterrestrial, artifact from some lost civilization? Okay, so his book on this kind of tips over into he thinks it's probably or likely or has a greater than 50% chance, barely, of it being extraterrestrial civilization in origin and not a comet or meteor or whatever asteroid. And he makes his arguments for that, but there's astronomers who have refuted that, or at least they think they have. They've responded to him, and he's responded to them, and that's how it works. So it's not really a matter of, in this case, fighting about who's right. It's just, what's the probability? Think of it more as a Bayesian reasoning rather than a Popperian falsification, and it's more like a light switch. It's either true or false. The problem is that we're not omniscient. We don't. No one knows for sure. So everything we believe has to be couched in Bayesian probabilities. So in this case, I don't think he's made the case that Oumuamua represents an artifact from a lost civilization. I think it's probably more likely in natural in origin, and most astronomers agree with me, not with him, and he knows that. But nevertheless, he could be right. It's not for sure natural in origin. So the Galileo Project is going to set up these cameras all over the world and take photographs, not just for Oumuamua type objects that are far away, but also all these UAPs, these UFOs, these unidentified aerial phenomenon. There's these half dozen videos by now everyone has seen of these kind of grainy videos and blurry photographs and stories by pilots about things that go really fast in the sky and so on. Well, what are those? So there's three hypotheses on the table. They're ordinary terrestrial phenomenon. Could be balloons or experimental aircraft, or it could be light reflected off the the windshield. It could be camera artifacts, could be light reflecting in the lens of the cameras. It could be, there's maybe 24 different things it could be, and each of them are different. So there could be more than one ordinary terrestrial phenomenon that we're witnessing here. The other two hypotheses, that they are Russian or Chinese assets, that is super advanced drones or planes that the Russians or Chinese have developed, and they're spying on our military bases and aircraft carriers and so on. The third hypothesis is that they're ETs. So the second and third hypotheses are very unlikely. In a Bayesian type reasoning analysis, the chances of the Russians or Chinese developing some technology that is essentially decades or centuries ahead of what we have, that's not how technology develops. No invention in the history of the world has ever not had some precursor that everybody knows about. Just take the jet engine, the Messerschmitt jet that the Nazis introduced in 1945, late 44, 1945. We had jets, within a year. The Manhattan Project, the most secret project in the history of the world to develop the atomic bomb. The Russians had it within 3 years. They stole our plans, right? Smartphones. Everybody has pretty much the same smartphone, even though Apple and Samsung, they have just elaborate security and intellectual property protections, and just to prevent anybody from stealing their ideas. And still it happens. Computers are all pretty much the same. Most technology is developed in different countries along the same pathways, pretty close. So the chances of that the Russians or Chinese have something that's gravity defying, that we're told by these pilots they think these UAPs represent, no, that's unlikely. And for other reasons that SETI scientists can articulate, the chances of them coming here, aliens, is very, very low, because there's probably not many of them out there, if they're out there at all. And the chances of them finding us is slim to none, because there's so much empty space between stars. So the ordinary terrestrial explanation is by far and away the likeliest one. And then one final point. Even the pro-ufologists, I've tracked this for 30 years now, they say that 95% of all sightings we've all seen on these shows are explainable by ordinary terrestrial phenomenon. And that we're only talking about the 5% anomalies. What do they represent? And again, it's likely they also have ordinary explanations. We just don't know what they are. And it's always okay to just say, I don't know what it is in that particular case, but that to then leap to the extraterrestrial explanation doesn't make sense.
What about electric ball phenomena?
That's another one. Yeah. That would be in the bin of ordinary terrestrial phenomenon, although it's not that ordinary. Ball lightning you're talking about, the Foo Fighters in World War II, or, people have seen these kind of plasma like balls traveling down the middle of a jet and that kind of thing. It's like, whoa, what was that? Okay, so, but we do know that, plasma energy is real. That's not supernatural. It's not extraterrestrial. It's terrestrial. And, I can give you the list. It's a long list of what these, of what the ufologists think.
They sure do their research, don't they?
They do, yeah, right. They certainly do. Okay, let me get this.
When they start pulling up spreadsheets, I start going, okay, someone did a little bit of research on there.
Yeah. Okay, here it is. Let me pull that up for you here. I'll just give you this comes from Leslie Kean. She wrote a book called UFOs, and she's a total believer that UFOs represent extraterrestrials. And she says, quote, roughly 90 to 95% of all UFO sightings can be explained as, and I quote her, weather balloons, flares, sky lanterns, planes flying in formation, secret military aircraft, birds reflecting the sun, planes reflecting the sun, blimps, helicopters, the planets Venus or Mars, meteors or meteorites, junk, space junk, satellites, swamp gas, spinning eddies, sundogs, ball lightning, ice crystals, reflected light off clouds, lights on the ground or lights reflected on a cockpit window, temperature inversions, hole punch clouds, and so on and so forth. So I'm just giving you 95%. Okay. So we have a new sighting. X represents a new sighting. Which bin should we put X in? In the list I just gave you that everybody agrees 95% of all sightings are explained, or in the other 5%. And the other 5% doesn't represent extraterrestrials. It just represents, we don't know. We don't have an explanation. Okay. 95% probability that your new sighting that you have goes in the 95% bin. It's probably nothing particularly special, just part of the terrestrial ordinary phenomenon.
That's what I think too. It's just, when you start understanding these groups, like I've been involved in the UFO community, and honestly, it's a topic that I've just like starting to get out of. It's just getting a little bit too much for me. Space in general, it's just infinite nothingness upon infinite nothingness that keeps expanding and expanding. It's like, I'd rather just work on like, gas is $4 and all that type of stuff. I want to try and figure out how to bring that
political
down.
issues.
Yeah. But when it comes to at least everything that you talk about and everything, at least people that you deal with, especially especially the most recent episode of your show as well too, with Elizabeth Weiss. Do you see like with society, just the change that is slowly just going downhill? And is there a hope that it comes out of it? I mean, it seems like there's more fighting than ever, referencing back to what I was talking about before. From a social scientist aspect, is this just from not being told the truth? Is just from finding cover-ups? Is it from conspiracies? Is it just a whole mix of stuff happening at once? I mean, I thought the UFO topic was healthy because it seemed like a lot of people that just wanted to believe that there was something else out there. But then you look at half the comments and hashtag UFO Twitter, and it's just onslaught of insults and people making fun of each other. Where I go, what about the topic when it used to be fun, where it used to be like, hey, there's this cool video, and then you could be like, well, this is that, obviously, but you don't want to hurt a person's feelings. I'm just wondering where it's all going to
Yeah.
go, because you got future generations of kids, my kids, for instance, or my kids' kids, for instance, or your grandkids, or whoever that keeps coming up. The next generation doesn't know what to believe in.
Yeah, I think it'd be going too far to say, society is going downhill. That's too broad a term. You might say academia has some problems with woke progressive ideology. The vast majority of professors are not just left leaning, but ever more far left and progressive leaning. We know this from polls, poll after poll after poll, particularly in the humanities and social sciences. So in any of those fields, like archaeology, has been corrupted. This whole idea of like Native American creation myths must be treated with respect, to the point that, we can't even like conduct normal scientific archaeological analysis of digs, because if the local Native American tribal population or group wants those back because those are their ancestors, then you all of a sudden you run into this. Well, what do you mean they're your ancestors? I mean, these fossils are 6,000 years old, and your population can only be traced back a few centuries. They're not your ancestors in that sense, to which you own the fossils. But that's the least of it. From there, you run into this idea that, well, what do you mean you're testing the migration hypothesis? How many migrations of humans came into North America from Siberia? Did they come through this land bridge? Did they walk down the ice-free corridor? Well, how did they get here when there was no ice-free corridor? Because it looks like the dates are being pushed back. Well, maybe they came by boats and so on. These are legitimate debates amongst archaeologists. But then you hear this, you run into the Native American creation myths. No, that none of that's true. We've always been here. What do you mean you've always been here? Well, humans evolved, Native American humans evolved in North America from scratch. They didn't migrate here. Okay, this is not true. This is complete nonsense. This is almost as bad as Christian creationism. But poor Elizabeth, her colleagues, who are these mostly woke progressive leftists, who would otherwise go after Mormon creationism, Christian creationism, Hindu whatever. But instead they go after her for challenging this creation myth. And so this conversation I had with her was just astonishing. Like, there was some group where they don't allow menstruating women near the archaeological dig because of some Native American tradition. It goes back, a patriarchal type tradition. Her female colleagues would be up in arms. They would go crazy if this was some Christian creationist telling her this, or some old white guy Mormons in Utah saying, you can't come to this dig because you're menstruating. I mean, I can barely, I'm embarrassed to even be saying these words. It's astonishing that this, in 2022, this is even a conversation. But that's what woke ideology does. It just corrupts your brain completely. These people are incapable of reasoning. I'll give you a story. So I don't have the final details on this because this student is writing this up for us in Skeptic, but he watched that podcast with my conversation with Elizabeth Weiss. And so he's an undergraduate at Arizona State University taking a class in archaeology. And the professor is talking about this film, Apocalypto, Mel Gibson's film about the Mayans and how violent they were. And that this is a totally racist film because the Mayans they were not that violent. Apparently, he's telling students. And furthermore, it doesn't show any positive aspects of the culture. Not true. Half the film was centered around the hero of this story. And at the end of the film, after this poor guy, the hero of the story, has been spent 2 hours in the film being brutally beaten and enslaved and almost killed. He and his wife come around the corner, and there's the Spanish galleon sitting out there in the bay. They're about to make first contact, and the film ends there, which I took to mean like, this poor guy just went from the fire now into the frying pan. The Spanish are going to come and wreak everlasting hell on these poor people. But no, that apparently was a racist thing. So this undergraduate sits this guy down, this full professor and scientist, and basically schools him on how to think about archaeology, science, reason, that film, and so on. And at the end, apparently the professor goes, I just really don't know why I think that I think you're probably right. And it's like, that's the state of academia today, that it takes an undergraduate who is not woke to explain to a professor why his reasoning is flawed. And he admitted it was flawed.
Well, from what I've heard from some academics is a lot of these times it's a teacher in a classroom of students that they brainwash, and that teacher doesn't fit in with most of the other professors, or the other professors don't agree with what they teach. They teach like maybe a woke version of something, and they brainwash the students into this. And then next thing you know, you have students that are refusing to go to a certain professor's class. Because they don't agree with their professor who taught them the woke ideas. Next thing you know, the people are afraid of their students, and they have to join that professor's side even though they don't agree. It's just the concept of getting your students not to skip out on your class or to do a riot or some type of protest in that sense. And I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I thought it was decentralization. There's an interview with Yuri Bezgamenov, ex-Russian KGB. It says it takes like a 20-year process of like sowing seeds of doubt and all this type of stuff into a younger population to get them to fight against and kind of tear up your own country in a way, which I thought was right until I started talking to so many academics and kind of seeing it firsthand from a lot of people. I knew the people who I was going to have like be kind of nervous to talk to, anybody that studies indigenous studies or anybody that has feminist in their bio. Feminist isn't a bad idea, but a lot of the people who are promoting that or saying that they're a feminist, they're like, you're a man, you have a crotch, you need to pay. I'm like, excuse me? The only issue, or the only thing I've seen that kind of, I guess, puts the boot off your neck in a sense, would be people who have had kids who are feminists, but they have their own children. They kind of were more easygoing with it. They kind of understood like having a regular discussion, not just being ramped up to level 11. I mean, a lot of times I'm talking to academics. You mentioned one thing, it's like walking on broken glass where you have to be careful what you say because that person's yelling at you, even though I'm just asking questions. If they're not the right questions that they want, I'm like, look, I don't know because I'm in the general public. And sadly, a lot of the general public is out of the know. They're using social media, they're finding hashtags, and they're going under certain groups to be able to try and get the information, but I follow like so many people, my algorithm guy must be pissed at me, but there's a lot of people that are stuck in an algorithm that's only giving them one-sided stuff, and then everything they see, and then they see something that's not in their thing, and they're ramped up because everything they've seen is like climate change and all this type of stuff, and they're attacking. It's like, well, have a discourse with it, have a conversation with it. But when you don't see a person's face, when you don't sense tone or emotion, it's so easy to easily tell that person to go do something that you don't ever want a person to do.
Yes. So again, I think it's specific problems that are best solved. Like, how do we address this claim or that claim, as opposed to society's going downhill or whatever. I'm more of a realist, optimist, I'd say. I think it's, despite the fact I am worried about 2024 election, I don't think we're heading for a civil war. I think there could be violence, but
You think Trump's
it's
going to
unlikely. I don't know. It's possible. And now some new surveys show that Democrats may not accept the legitimacy of the election if Trump wins because of all the things that he's been doing behind the scenes, kind of replacing people that were in these key swing states who were counting the ballots and in charge of the elections in those states with people that would do whatever he tells them to do. His problem with the 2020 election was that his own appointed Republican politicians who were involved in the election in those states didn't go along with the rigged election lie. And they said, no, there was no fraud here. We ran a legitimate election and you lost, boss. Sorry. And, he just refused to accept it. Well, he's replacing those people. He's replacing those people with people that will say, I'll just say whatever you want me to say. So next time when he calls, when he called Georgia and said, I just need 11,187 votes. Just come on, just find me those votes. The next time when he makes that call, the person may go, okay, I'll find him for you. That could happen. And then what happens, it's hard to say. It could be that this would be an irony for the Republicans. They want the vice president to be able to override, count the votes. That's what Pence was supposed to do. Say, that we're not going to honor the electoral college votes because of this or that shenanigans in the election. Well, the next person to do that is going to be Vice President Harris, Kamala Harris. And maybe she'll say, nope, I'm going to do what the Republicans told me to do. I'm not going to count the votes for that show that Trump won. Oh, that would be quite the quite the spectacle. I'm just speculating. No one knows what's going to happen.
What about
it could be
independent? Do you think an independent could win?
It could be that someone like an Andrew Yang could get the could take the. It's not likely. Third parties almost never get anywhere in the United States.
You would think if people think we're in a simulation, then instead of going with left or right, you would pick the one that never has been picked before. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just the odd man out in that one.
Simulation, yes. Well, I would like to see the Republicans put a candidate forward who's more centrist, moderate, reasonable, rational, not a cult leader like Trump. Someone like a DeSantis from Florida. I'm not a fan, but he's way better than Trump. Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, any of those. Maybe Jeb Bush will make a comeback. Probably not, but somebody new that's more to the right of center, but not so far right. And and that would be the corrective to the far left. We don't want a far left either. We want our politics between the 240-yard lines. This kind of crazy left, crazy right is not good. So I've been pounding on the insurrectionists of January 6th, but the people that attacked the cities, the Antifa people that have burned down parts of Seattle and Portland and other cities, San Francisco, that they're just as bad. We have to get rid of all these, not get rid of, we have to counter these extremists on both sides.
Yeah. Well, I think we need, much like we were talking about with, Elizabeth Weiss and people going after her for things. And then especially a lot with society, it seems like everyone wants like a Jesus on a cross, and then they want like a person that they have to burn as well too. They're always looking for like one person that's the enemy and one person that's going to save them. When I think we need a president is someone who stays calm, cool, and collective when it comes to being able to lead people out of a mass hysteria, which is in a lot of sense what the past couple of years have been. People don't know what to do. They're flipping on news channels and information's constantly being flipped around and doing 180s all the time. It just seems like a lot of people have a large mistrust right now. And I think the best thing is to say, you don't know. We're going to figure this out one step at a time. And, I guess hopefully we find an answer in a sense, but it seems like a lot of knowing, it seems like it's knowing, but it's not. It's just a lot of like bravado in a sense. I just think there's a large collective of people, much like myself, looking for answers, want to know answers, trying to do multiple different sources of news, but everyone has a bias and something. Look at the ads at the bottom of half of the websites. If it says Joe Biden's the devil at the bottom of the website, I bet you that's a Republican website. I mean, you start to like learn a little bit more, and you start to see kind of the flaws come through in a lot of aspects. People start to have more biases, and what people want to say about Joe Rogan and stuff. My issue is when it leads to censorship, because I think you need to have all this stuff out there. You need to have people that are, hopefully you need to respect people enough to hope that they have the intelligence to be able to decipher out information for themselves, or look for someone to help guide them through this. But the violent stuff, I mean, you can censor that, but then it goalpost moves. It keeps going and going and going, and it doesn't stop. Next thing you know, you can't say a certain name of a drug on YouTube anymore. You can't. Now, there are platforms that are privately owned. I understand that. But it's more like everything like the internet. During COVID, it started to become a requirement. Now it's like how people do their jobs. There's no need to go to the office anymore. And it's starting to become ushering more into your life than ever, where I'm seeing more of a digital age come through. And I'm not, I was scared of it because the one topic I'm sure we're not going to be able to hit is like the artificial life and all that type of stuff. that used to scare the crap out of me, but now I'm like so pro for it. Mostly because it would be cool
What
to
do you
send
mean artificial life?
like
What do you mean?
robotic AI going so far.
Oh,
People want
AI,
to
artificial intelligence. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean
Yeah.
that's a whole thing like space colonization could possibly Avi Loeb was talking about like could be your children, your
I'm
artificial
for it.
children.
Let's go.
That's what I'm
Let's
saying. I used
go.
to be against it, but that's interesting to me because I definitely think that's a cool topic. But I think with the technology that's advancing so quickly is that you also want to make sure you can manage it. And when it comes to managing it, not talking about censorship, but an aspect of like just making sure you're covering the potholes that you're leaving behind. And a lot of people
Hmm.
are so willing to jump into the new thing without looking at every single step. Like, okay, well, if I do, say, if I build this power plant here, then what's gonna, it's gonna be cool. It's gonna be nice. Oh, don't worry about the people with their homes or anything of that sort. Now I get the essentialness of power as a business aspect, but you start to look at like there's steps and there's a cause and effect to everything. Are you willing to pull that plug that's holding that water back through that wall and not know what's behind it, not know how much water is there? Or are you going to do like a small little dent just to see a little bit of water trickle in and let the water slow down, come all the way down to a base level, then do it so you don't get soaking wet? I'm just saying, like, you got to weigh your options when it comes to a lot of these things, especially with UFO topics, people jumping headfirst into something. Okay, well, what's the evidence? Oh, well, there's this video. Okay, well, that video people can debunk pretty easily. Do you got any more evidence? Well, there's this account, this account. When do those accounts take place? 1976 and 1950. You got anything in 2000? We got iPhone 13s for like God's sake. Like you should be able to get a video.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. The UAP thing is, I mean, when you pull back and look at the bigger picture, we're being told that these things are buzzing our military aircraft and aircraft carriers, military bases, nuclear power plants, nuclear weapons facilities, and so on. Really? Like regularly? Where are the photographs and videos? We have surveillance satellites up there that can see stuff. We have cameras all over the place. These bases are heavily photographed and secure. And then we're told that this guy in 60 Minutes, one of the Navy pilots, told the correspondent, excuse me, that he's seeing these things every day. It's like every day. Well, particularly on the coast, he's like the coast of California, Southern California, off of San Diego. Well, there's millions of people walking around with high definition video cameras in their pockets. Why are there no videos? There's none. Zero. Where are they? If these things are all over the place and they're buzzing our airspace every day, where's the evidence? Instead, what we get are, again, these half dozen grainy videos, blurry photographs, and stories about spooky things that move really fast. That's not evidence. It's just not. It's not very good evidence at all. I mean, you can investigate it, you can look into it, but what you see online or by the pro UFO people is like, this is it. It's happened. We've made contact. No, we haven't. That is not the case. That's not good evidence, and that's the problem. People don't know how to evaluate evidence, and they're happy to take a little tiny piece of something and then run with it and create a whole new worldview. And that's just not how science works.
Do you think a lot of people only see what they want to see and not maybe the evidence that's placed in front of them?
Well, the confirmation bias, where once you've committed to a particular position, hypothesis, theory, belief, whatever, you just screen out the counter evidence or select only the best evidence in favor of it. Everybody does this, and so that's why in the scientific process you have, that's the whole point of peer review, is that somebody else is going to screen this before we publish it to see if there are counter arguments. We can't count on you to make the counter argument.
I
So
don't
there
really
is pressure for
trust
that.
peer review that much, only because I feel like if you got a
Why?
bunch of people that agree with the same narrative, if you just have peers that agree with it, what you're about to publish, maybe you should look for other peers that don't necessarily agree with you. You should
Well,
be,
there's lots of journals you can publish in, and there's pressure, particularly on young scientists, to debunk other prevailing ideas. That's how you can make a career. Look, I showed how this prevailing theory was wrong, and I have a new one. Like, I think Einstein. It does happen. It happens all the time in science. The belief that ulcers were caused by stress, turns out they were caused by these viruses. Oh, okay. Wow. Didn't know that. How did that happen? If peer review doesn't work and new ideas never get in, how do all these scientific revolutions happen? Because they happen all the time. So that's not true. It's just that science is conservative because most new ideas that people have are wrong. including those by scientists. And so we start with the null hypothesis that your new idea is probably not right. It's probably wrong. Now, but we have an open mind. So go ahead and give us the best evidence you have, and we'll see. And usually it never works out. Back to Avi Loeb, he put forth, to his credit, I have a hypothesis that this Oumuamua thing was extraterrestrial in origin. Civilization in origin. And his colleagues, he got a fair hearing. And there's been not just responses to his book, but many journal articles, back and forth. But most scientists don't accept his hypothesis. And so that's just the way it goes. But if it turns out that there's another one that comes through and we find out it definitively is, and everybody can see this high resolution photograph from the spacecraft that went out there to intercept it. Turns out it's a big Dyson sphere or something or whatever. And then he was right. Okay. Then scientists would then go, okay, he was right. And they would change their mind.
What about the 500 scientists that reviewed that episode with Robert Malone on Joe Rogan? And they found out that most of those scientists were dentists and things that yeah, you have a doctor degree, but are you really a doctor in a sense?
I don't know this document. You mean 500 scientists signed a document saying Joe Rogan Robert Malone was wrong?
Yeah, there was an episode with Robert Malone that came out. And then
I saw that.
There was by Reuters, or I think it's Reuters, right? The Reuters, or I always want to say Reuters,
yep.
But I think it's Reuters.
Reuters is the news service. Yeah.
They posted an article after that episode saying, fact check, 500 scientists said that Robert Malone spread nothing but misinformation on that podcast. And they look at the 500 scientists, and a lot of them were like dentists, like chiropractors, things where you have a doctor in front of your name. So it was like, that's what I have an issue with peer reviewed. It's like how many people are just
well, that's not peer review. That's not peer review. That's signing a document, a statement. That's not how science works. I mean, you'll get something like that where you'll hear something like 97% of climate scientists say anthropogenic global warming is real. Okay, but that's not actually what happened. It was a single study done of over 10,000 published peer-reviewed journal published articles on climate science, in which 97% of those articles came to the conclusion of anthropogenic global warming is real. So it's not a statement of belief. Scientists don't sign statements of belief. Well, they might, but that isn't how science works. So that is not a proper response to Robert Malone on Joe Rogan's podcast. The proper response is just to line up his claims. What exactly did he say? And what is it that we know at the moment about what he said? Is he right? Is he wrong? Is he partially right? Could he be right? And that's the only way to respond. Not, here's a document and I'm going to sign it and denounce him. That's not proper science.
Yeah, it seems like we're back to what I was saying before about having an actual discourse and talk about it as well too. I even when I hear something on Joe Rogan, I kind of look it up for myself. I don't really just sit there and listen to what one person says. I like to get both sides of the thing, and then people want him to debate people as well now too. And you've talked to him a couple of times, so I just think you understand him probably better than a lot of people that are just listening to him talk or follow him as just a person that's just looking for information as well too. And I'm not here fighting for Joe Rogan or anything like that sort, not at all. But I think that's a lot of people only see clips online rather than looking into the actual thing. And that's like that with anything. You see a headline article. I don't know for how long I wanted the Wuhan thing to be true. And I kept saying it's this and this and this. They've buried that narrative so many times, and then they keep coming back to it where I'm like, can you just I'm just going to wait. If it's 50 years, if it's 100 years, whatever. I can't sit here. You can't ruin your whole day about it. Most people sit there on their phone refreshing every minute, just waiting for someone to talk shit on them. And it's like, you can't do that. You're going to ruin your own happiness. Don't destroy your own happiness or let other people rent your headspace.
Well, back to where we started on journalism. Joe Rogan is not a journalist. His show is not a news show. It's a podcast. It's a conversation. He'll talk to anybody about anything. Joe's very open-minded, easygoing. He's curious. He's smart. He's interested. And so whatever the person on the other side of the table is telling him, he's thinking, okay, there might be something to that. What do I know? And it's not his job to filter, fact check, to have a formal debate online, like a 60-minute show or one of these talk shows that promotes debates. That's not his job. So if that's what you're looking for, go somewhere else. That's not what he's doing. and he doesn't prepare. He just you're watching it in real time, like he is. He doesn't know what he's going to say, and that's okay.
How I
He's
do it.
done, I don't know, almost 2,000 episodes or whatever, and no one's talking about the 1,677 episodes in which nothing particular upsetting was said, right? So there's kind of a picking the worst case scenario, and that's focusing on that, or worse, that Media Matters company, I think it was, paid somebody to go through every hour of the, I don't know, 10,000 hours of Rogan's podcast and find anything where he used the N-word or anything offensive we can get him on. This is what I find especially disturbing, this cancel culture. We got to get this guy and bring him down. He's too big. It has nothing to do with what's true or what his intent was. In the case of the N-word, he's just mentioning how other people use the N-word by using the N-word.
Yeah.
And it's like, but intent matters. Intention is everything. In a murder case, if the famous example of of the wife who kills her husband because she put rat poison into his coffee when she thought it was sugar. Okay, if she really thought it was sugar, then that's not murder. That's an accidental, whatever. But if she thought it was poison and her intention was to kill her husband, well, then that's a whole different thing. Intention is everything in the law. But on social media, intention doesn't matter. If we can get you on something, we got you. And that is just so disturbing. The fact that, and the bigger you are, I mean, there's like over 1 million podcasters now. Why Joe Rogan? Well, because he's big. That's why, and that's just the nature of the beast now that we're facing. So anyway, there was something else I was going to say about that. That's just the world we're living in.
Well, he's probably one of my biggest. He's one of probably my biggest inspirations, just because I have no script when you come on here. We just kind of talk. I was hoping I was gonna give you time for my conspiracy, but I know you got to run too. But it's been.
What is your conspiracy?
Okay. So it's a joke. How many people do you know that when you went to high school with or college with that have gotten like an injury they said that stopped them from going pro? How many people? Come on. A lot.
I'm one of them. I would have turned pro, but
so what I think it is that I think that the coach has a lever, and when you're playing, he just raises the field just enough to where your toes don't match your heel, and you get like a fractured ankle. Then you got to stay with them forever. It's a joking one. It's not like a serious like go storm a building one, but it was a conspiracy. It's a good one.
Yeah. There's a funny a video made years ago about dumb shit that cyclists say, about like carbon wheels. Oh, these wheels make such a difference, or I'm going vegan this season, but the best one is oh, I would so turn pro, but I got to work, or I would turn pro, but I got married, or I would turn pro, but I have other things I'd rather do. And it's like, dude, you probably can't ever go pro no matter what. I think everybody thinks that. It's a funny thing to say. Yeah. Okay.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on this show. Is there a place, if you want to say your links where people can find you, I can link to the episode as well too. It'll be in the details.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Skeptic.com is the main portal for the magazine and the podcast. And Michael Shermer Substack is, my Skeptic column. And the Michael Shermer Show, you just look up Michael Shermer Show on any of your podcast platforms. And michaelshermer.com, has all my personal stuff. And then if you go to Amazon, type in my name, you'll get all my books. And all my books are on audio as well, since everybody's consuming content by audio, including me. I love doing that. Podcasts are a great form of absorbing really interesting content. So anyway, that's it.
I'll link it all in the description. And thanks for listening to this episode Out of the Blank Podcast.